The Lindy Institute is about recognizing that innovation is critical to the advancement of society, critical to the advancement of cities, critical to the advancement of the human condition. How then do we at Drexel organize an institute that can draw on not only the 15 schools and colleges of Drexel, the wealth of cultural and other institutions in Philadelphia, connect us to the broader world in terms of the challenges as well as the resources, and think of ways to catalyze innovation?
I think A.J. Drexel was doing urban innovation when he founded the Institute in 1891, and I think that the Lindy Institute is really sort of nothing more than an extension of the mission of the institute he founded, the university that we have today.
Our mission statement says it all. We forge innovative strategies to equitably advance cities.
The Lindy Institute is the natural home for our academic problem solving, for the interdisciplinary work that we can do on the ground in the university that connects to solving problems, whether it's in the city or around the world.
What the Lindy Institute can do is it can take a deeper dive into some of these social issues, kind of bring the right people together to the table to sit down, to not only discuss the issues, but come up with solutions. And that's very important if we really want to sustain long-term, and I think the Lindy Institute can be a key player in that.
In collaboration with the Lindy Institute, we're offering a Masters of Science in Urban Strategy, which is an interdisciplinary urban leadership program that draws from all of the expertise around Drexel University. It would be impossible to do it without community participation at its core. So we are taking these classes out of the four walls of the university and into the neighborhoods. We have to put this community engagement into practice if our students are ever going to learn how to do it as professionals.
Citizens are experts in their lives, and to be able to engage at that level and bring our expertise as well as the kind of resources that a great university can bring, but in a trusted partnership with the citizenry, I think is the way of the future. So engagement and community is what Lindy's all about. Drexel, from its get-go, in its DNA, it's a doing place. When Anthony J. Drexel founded Drexel at the corner of 32nd and Chestnut Street, it was all about how he could prepare people for work in the Industrial Revolution. It wasn't about theory, and it wasn't purely about practice, and that's really the fine line that we sit on.
Anthony Drexel's founding vision was so far ahead of its time. If you think about, the sort of founding name of the institution, the Drexel Institute for Art, Science, and Industry, he touched on all three missions. And I think, again, back in 1891, no one was thinking that way. I think we really have the sort of history and the capacity and frankly the humanity that will allow us to do this. And I think the work that we're doing through great things like the Lindy Institute just demonstrate that in a very palpable and tangible way.
What I like so much about Drexel is they see themselves as part of the community, not an island, something separate and apart. And they want to reach out into the various communities and do what they can to try to improve conditions for the people who live there. It may not be students, may not be faculty, but they're stakeholders, and they see themselves as stakeholders in the community at large.
Good evening and welcome. What a great audience. I'm Harris Steinberg, Director of the Lindy Institute for Urban Innovation at Drexel, and I'll be your host this evening. These dialogues are brought to you by Drexel's Office of International Programs, along with the Lindy Institute, as part of Drexel's commitment to Global Philly, the stewards of Philadelphia's recent World Heritage City designation. We're doing it a little differently tonight, in case you didn't notice, TV talk show style, with music and video interludes. It's an experiment and our beta year. You'll see me walk very slowly across the stage with a cane. I'm recuperating from surgery for what is called a dropped foot. I'm making good progress. I'm indebted to so many of you. I have an awesome team at the Lindy Institute who, along with the Mole Street Productions, made this evening happen. Alan Greenberger, Jeremy Nowak, Shannon Marquez, and Andrew Zitzer carried significant intellectual water as we created the Urban Innovation Fellowship Program we're here to celebrate tonight. My boss, John Fry, whose legendary leadership sees no hurdles, only opportunities, tonight is the manifestation of John's vision for the Lindy Institute as a bully pulpit on urbanism. A special hello to Alan and Elaine Lindy, children of Phil Lindy, whom the Institute honors, David Haas and Feather Houston of the Winco Foundation, good friends and supporters of the Institute and the fellowship program, and our gratitude to the William Penn Foundation and the Knight Foundation for their support. But, most importantly, my wife Jane, who for the past 6 months has patiently nursed this 60-year-old invalid back from surgery, and she merits a huge shout out. So why are we here tonight? This is the Lindy Institute's debut public programming, our entree onto that bully pulpit stage. This Drexel Dialogues caps 3 days of our first Urban Innovation Summit. The summit had thinkers and doers from across Philadelphia and around the world working with our new Urban Innovation Fellows on their projects to improve the lives of Philadelphians. The summit and this evening are about change, about who owns the future. Tonight, we'll have a series of conversations, dialogues, about change and problem solving from a variety of vantage points. Our headliners are Bruce Katz and Jeremy Nowak. Bruce is a Centennial Scholar at the Brookings Institution, and Jeremy is a Distinguished Visiting Fellow of the Lindy Institute. Bruce is one of the world's preeminent scholars of cities, and Jeremy is a friend and the intellectual taproot of Philadelphia's post-industrial urban revitalization. Our second conversation will be with Alan Greenberger, Shannon Marquez, and Roberto Moris. With them, we'll explore the relationship between the local and the global. Alan is an old friend and head of Drexel's Department of Architecture, Design, and Urbanism. As deputy mayor for planning and economic development during the Nutter administration, he restored the public's faith in city planning. Shannon is a vice provost and director of the Dornsife Global Development Scholars Program at Drexel. Her work in global environmental health is as important in developing countries as it is here at home. And Roberto is Director of Plans and Urban Projects at Catolica University in Santiago, Chile. His work blends civic engagement with state-of-the-art modeling to help mitigate risk along the Pacific Rim. And finally, the pièce de résistance, the newly minted Urban Innovation Fellows, the heart of tonight's program, and the Urban Innovation Summit. 106 Philadelphians from across the geographic and socioeconomic spectrum submitted applications. I'd like to acknowledge all who applied who are in the house tonight. If we could give them a round of applause. The fellowship called for individuals who are working on intractable urban challenges that cross social, economic, and environmental borders, as well as traditional academic disciplines. Our first class of Lindy Institute Urban Innovation Fellows are Priya Maiman, Director of Public Health Programs at Jefferson. Priya's project looks at how urban emergency departments might be positioned as true community centers and agents for social justice. Michael OBrien, Director of Youth and Young Adult Programs at the Village of Arts and Humanities, is reimagining workforce development practices and tools for marginalized youth. Christopher Spar, the Executive Director of the Centennial Parkside Community Development Corporation, continues his work on an energy investment district in the East Parkside neighborhood of Philadelphia. Thank you for your patience. That's a lot to take in, a lot to get through, and we're almost there, just a little bit more. We all know what's happening in DC today, with the ideological and political battle royale waging between the urban and the rural, and between the expansive American heart and the xenophobic stain on our heritage. As Bruce and Jeremy teach us, we can't wait for Washington to invest in our future. We need to continue to innovate to keep Philadelphia fresh, vigorous, and relevant for each generation. Innovation has driven the advancement of civilization throughout human history. Innovation is to culture as evolution is to biology, a continual response to the needs and challenges of human life with a trend line towards successful adaptation and refinement. Cities are engines of innovation, fueled by proximity to people, ideas, capital, and culture. If you believe that the city is one of humankind's greatest and most sustainable creations, you are then bound to ensure its survival as a form of human settlement and expression of our deepest held human values: equality, opportunity, freedom of expression, and mutual respect. Tonight, we start the conversation. First, We're going to play a short video clip to introduce Priya as one of our fellows, and then we'll bring on our first round of guests. So sit back and enjoy the first video clip.
Emergency departments are really the interface of the community they serve and the hospital system. And we have our approach to do things, and it's a specific kind of paradigm of what's your problem, how can we fix it? But if you take a couple steps back, you realize a lot of the problems cannot be fixed by a Band-Aid or a pill, and we can see it. We see it every day, all of the other social determinants of health and how they absolutely interact in every instance in the emergency department. I wanted to show that emergency departments could be perfect partners in any kind of initiative that addresses population health and really improves the lives of a community. The next step is really specifically focused on the opioid epidemic. That's definitely hit our city, hit our country, and emergency physicians have really been on the front line of that for well over a decade. When we see somebody who comes in, brought in by the ambulance for an overdose, we can reverse that. But we know that nobody is going to be able to deal with their dependence if they don't have a safe place to go and they don't have safe ways to eat. They don't have other support systems. I want to sort of bring all of these great thinkers together and put it in context and say, as a group with all hands on deck, we can absolutely address this issue.
So I'd like to welcome up Bruce Katz and Jeremy Nowak. Well, this is sort of an urbanist fantasy to have these two guys up here. I was thinking on the way down, this is like Urban SEAL Team 6, who are kind of here to tell. They've been in battle, and we're now going to kind of see what they learned, and we're bringing it back to Philly. But first, a plug for their new book, The New Localism, which comes out this month.
It'll actually be in bookstores on January 9th.
All right. In 2018, early 2018, and we are told it's available for pre-order on Amazon. So that was your staff.
Exactly.
Bruce. Yes.
Exactly.
Not that we're pushing the book, Harris.
Well, we're going to talk about the book. It's a wonderful book, and what's great about these guys is, as I said in my opening, I mean, they really walk the walk as well as talk the talk. And I guess the question is, first for Bruce, what is the new localism? How did that? Trump is in office now, but when you started this book, it was before he was in office. What trends did you see coming?
I decided to write the book and then called Jeremy up to be a fellow masochist, probably about a month after the election.
Ah, okay.
And obviously you go through all the stages of grief. And that's a nonpartisan statement, which you can now say. But a mutual friend of ours called us and said, you got to do something, and you got to do it with him. So this was really an effort or it was sort of a recognition that what's going to happen in the next 4 years is that Trump and Bannon obviously called for this deconstruction of the administrative state. But what actually is going to happen in these 4 years is we're going to accelerate the rise of the city-state. And as Jeremy and I started thinking about this devolution of power and responsibility, sort of downward, not just in the United States, but really across the world, from national governments and state governments down to cities and metropolitan communities, horizontally across from public sector to public-private civic university, and then transnationally across global circuits of innovation and capital ideas. What we were basically saying is, in this century, cities and the networks of institutions and leaders who govern them and co-govern them are going to be on the vanguard of problem solving. Now, some of that is just cyclical, because our national governments have become essentially ossified and dysfunctional. The federal government, like Elvis, has left the building. But it's also because the challenges we face today, whether it's climate, whether it's demographic transformation, whether it's social mobility, whether it's the opioid epidemic, require integrated, multidimensional, cross-sectoral solutions. That's what cities are.
So systems, it's all about systems
Absolutely.
and change. So Jeremy, the specter of populism appears in the book as a byproduct of the same forces that created the new localism.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Let me add just one thing, and I'll get right to populism, but as Bruce was talking, let me add one thing. We recognize, and we're very clear in the book, that a strong federal government would be a good thing. And there's a role for the federal government as a regulatory and distributive platform that's absolutely important. But increasingly, the way problems will be solved will be these networks of public, private, and civic, where economic value is being created in metropolitan and highly urbanized communities across the world, right? So we don't want localism to be a reason to not have a functioning federal government. But in times like this, when the level of dysfunction is high, it's even more important to talk about it. And I think a second thing which is important, and I will get to the populism question, is that this radical devolution, and Bruce has really been helpful for me in my thinking about this radical devolution was not accompanied with the resources to compensate, nor necessarily the institutions to be able to do the transformative problem-solving work. So we're clear that, in the 21st century, power will increasingly belong to the problem solvers, right?
Power.
Those
what
problem
about the resources?
resources, we talk a lot about that in the book, and we can get into that. But it's not only where the resources are, and we've got lots of ideas about that, but it's also what's the repurposing of institutions, whether it's the emergency room in a hospital or it's the role of the university. So we also have 20th and in some instances 19th century institutions for 21st century problem solving.
Yeah.
Just quickly on populism, and in the very beginning we actually thought about calling it In the Age of Trump, but we thought, let's have it be a little bit.
Maybe he'll be indicted.
We actually did have that conversation early on. Maybe, it'd be too late. But it was really that this was much more, it was about more than Trump. It was about a level of dissatisfaction that is, you can see globally, certainly in the US and in Europe, that's expressed in many different ways because of these transformative shifts over the last 40 years in terms of demography, technology, and globalization. Our thesis is that the same things that brought on populism, both populism of the right and the left, that those same structural transformations is why we have what we're calling new localism. It's why problems are now being solved in this way. So for us, populism, understandably, is about the expression of grievance, and there's lots of good reasons for grievance, including widening income inequality. New localism is about solutions, and we wanted to focus on solutions. And we saw around the country, this isn't just aspirational, this is about how things are being solved, whether it's in Philadelphia or in Akron or in Pittsburgh, things are being solved locally in a different way.
And it's really back to the future, right?
It is in that way, absolutely.
The voluntary associations that de Tocqueville
Sure.
lauded were about the new the old
absolutely.
localism,
Yeah.
where you built a hospital because you needed a hospital.
That's right.
So that's great context. We've got the kind of the devolution of power to networks of cities. We've got kind of the rise of kind of local repurposing of institutions to kind of help kind of meet those challenges. You look at a couple of cities in the book and offer some case studies, 2 of them in the United States and 1 in Europe. I'm going to ask you, Bruce, if you could tell us about the US examples, why they're important, and if there's any lessons for us here in Philadelphia, because you know us a little bit from our work with you, and would love to get your unfiltered insight into that.
So I think the frame for thinking about these lessons is that in an urban-led world, what you need to focus on are norms and models of growth, governance, and finance. So what will happen is a city, whether it's here in Europe or elsewhere, will be the innovator. They'll be the first mover. And then we'll capture and codify that, and whatever they've done. And then we have to think about how do you adapt and adopt it across the United States and across the world. You can never just mimic and replicate, particularly the sophisticated stuff. So when we were thinking about growth, we were thinking about Pittsburgh. And why are we thinking about Pittsburgh? Because Pittsburgh has, and frankly you have, this spatial geography that is really late 19th century, early 20th century, where you co-located your major advanced research institutions, many of your hospitals, mature companies, startup scale-ups, intermediaries, but in these very small, what we call innovation districts. And they have the ecosystem that is built to collaborate, to compete. And the market right now, innovation, whether it's around autonomous vehicles, whether it's around genomics, whether it's around machine learning, is all about networks and all about mature companies engaging with this very diverse ecosystem, but in relatively small geographies. The economy wants proximity, density, authenticity, connectivity, everything that cities have, that's what they want. The Pittsburgh story is a place that, going back 40 years, began to invest in centers of excellence in this relatively small geography, in this mixed network kind of way. Mostly informal, and therefore the governance story we have is Indianapolis. If you went back to the 1970s, Kurt Vonnegut was a native of Indianapolis, and he basically says, Indianapolis is a place where 364 days you play miniature golf, and then you go to the Speedway on the 365th day. It was called Sleepy Indy, right? Not a hell of a lot was going on. But what they basically did was the philanthropies, the universities, the corporations came together, first to make themselves the amateur sports capital of the world. I'm not sure why anyone would want to do that, but that's what they did. And then they went from basketball to biotech. And they began to think about, you know, there's only so many sports stadia you can build. There's only how much beer and hot dog can you consume. So how do we become an advanced economy, an innovative economy off this platform of collaboration? So they have built a highly formalized structure, well capitalized, that innovate in seriatim in Indianapolis, the city, the metro, the region, and the state, around what they're good at. It's all evidence-driven, it's all sort of outcome sort of measured. And we think going forward, if cities really are gonna be the vanguard of problem solving, you can't fake it. I mean, we're gonna have to find new ways, new institutions, as Jeremy has said, new ways of breaking down the barriers between institutions that have sort of watched each other warily in cities, you know, in some ways have actually competed over real estate or over exposure.
And you didn't have any experience with us.
Oh no, I mean, this is, you know, Philly is just it's the city of brotherly love. But you know, I think what we're trying to basically tease out is both in Pittsburgh and in Indianapolis, and frankly, this place can be a global leader in so many respects that I think we have found enabling features that have projected these places to really the top of the heap.
Yeah, no, it's thrilling having worked with you over the past 2 years and seen just the intensity of the assets and the aggregation physically, as you've said. We certainly are positioned for it, and then it comes down to leadership, and that seems to be the Indianapolis story. Yeah, but we certainly have the leadership in Philadelphia, and it seems to be aligning towards implementation. So, Jeremy, what did Copenhagen teach you?
Well, you know, the Copenhagen chapter is a chapter about public wealth. It's really a chapter about how a city, which went through very, very difficult times, but is doing great now, how a city utilized took public assets, a public corporation, but ran it like a private concern, but kept the public wealth public, and with the profits, plowed it back into the city through infrastructure, their metro, et cetera, et cetera. So what Copenhagen was really about was a way for us to think about assets and what cities really own versus what cities owe. We spend time talking about, you know, when you think about public finance, You think about, obviously, the profit and loss statement, the budget and where you get money and where you spend it. You think about liabilities, debt, unfunded pension liabilities, et cetera. But very few cities and very few nations can tell you what they actually own and how, if they had a return on those assets, not necessarily through privatization, which we were not at all pushing, but if they manage those assets better, how they could create more wealth for the public. So we used Copenhagen as a way to reflect on the many missed opportunities in the US and other places for leaving too much on the table in the case of the public sector, which means that the public sector will have to have the kind of, not the private market discipline just to be a business, that's not it at all. It's to be able to generate wealth for public goods.
Yeah.
And there we think there's great opportunities and yet too often missed opportunities. We're really clear at the end of the day that you use the expression, who's going to own the future, right? Well, the future for us in this book has to do with investments in infrastructure and innovation, and it has to do with, kids, right? At the end of the day, it has to do with inclusion, which ultimately is about young people, where we're going to go, how we're going to give them the tools, the relationships, the background to be able to be successful. So inclusion, infrastructure, innovation. Well, then the question is, during a period of radical devolution, where you don't have those resources, where does the money come from, right?
Yeah.
So we spend a lot of time talking about that, and Copenhagen is one of many examples of where there is money, but we haven't really thought about that, and we have missed the opportunity to take better advantage of what it is that we already own. And so that's really the goal of the Copenhagen chapter.
Do you, both of you, this is a question for both of you, how do these lessons apply to Philadelphia? And what can we do right now? I know there's a long game, but there's also kind of the short game. And what are we leaving on the table? What are the kind of stumbling blocks to our success? You both know our psyche and our promise. So I would love to hear.
Well, I think we can
You
start.
want to take that? I'd live here.
No. I mean, I think you can start with the growth platform.
Right.
Because, your innovation assets, Penn, Drexel, Jeff, CHOP, I mean, I could just go on, the Navy Yard and how that's evolved. I mean, you've just got this incredible platform to basically compete globally on next generation technologies, which in a relatively short period of time are going to generate enormous wealth for the places that can be on the ground floor. You've got these assets. They're in relatively small geographies. There is high levels of proximity and connectivity. So most places don't start with that. You start with that. So it really comes down to governance and finance.
Yeah.
It's, can you govern in a collaborative way, and can you unlock value in a very smart and strategic way so you can make the kind of investments that have to be made.
So Jeremy,
I would say
follow up on that.
Yes, I would say so while there isn't a case study in Philadelphia, there are several parts of the book where we talk about Philadelphia. And we have a chapter on inclusion, because none of this works unless we can build a more inclusive society as part of this. And we use the example of what institutions like Drexel and others are doing, or what they're not doing, to try to build a broader tent.
Equity.
Yeah, to try to create some more equity in development. So that's one issue. Cities like Philadelphia that have high poverty rates and then have these wonderful growth assets will have to figure out how to more methodically connect those as we move forward. I would say, to reflect on what Bruce said about Philadelphia, because I agree with him, I would say two other things. Look, 10 years ago, I would say in Philadelphia, 2 + 2 = 3. I would now say 2 + 2 = 4. And what we have to do is get to 2 + 2 = 5. And we are moving in the right direction, right? Yep. But it has taken a while to move there. Yeah. And I would say if there's one final thing, just as an example, in the Copenhagen chapter, we actually talk about the Navy Yard in Philadelphia. Yep. There's an example where I think PIDC did a tremendous job. Right there was, you could argue that the best thing that happened to the Navy Yard is it didn't stay being a Navy Yard. Nobody thought of that at the time. In the early 1990s. It was, you know, Buzz. It was a big thing in the Buzz Bissinger book. It was a big thing in House of Cards in the first season. You know, it was like everywhere, right? You know, but the best thing that happened in a way is that we were forced to reinvent it. Now, I would say, and I'll say this, we said it, it's in the book, we've said it to people we have a lot of respect for, like John Grady and others. I wish they could have even built their balance sheet more out of those transactions, so there would have been more public wealth. So there's a role in the US, which is an important role, of the public catalyzing markets. I believe in that, I was in that business. But you don't want to leave so much on the table. You want the public to catalyze markets, but also to retain some of that wealth to be able to invest in other things, particularly at a time when there aren't huge amounts of money coming from other places for that investment.
So are both of you hopeful for Philadelphia? Does it seem like we're, as you said, we're 2 + 2 = 4. We want to get to 2 + 2 = 5, 6, 7. Where do you, Bruce, kind of see us eventually perhaps competing kind of within, from your worldview, in terms of the types of cities that are kind of grappling with similar issues and trying to kind of put together the type of innovation economy that Philadelphia is?
Well, look, I don't really lose any sleep over Philadelphia, to be frank. I actually think there's a whole, you know, there's quite a number of places in the United States that really do need a national government. Right. And they actually need some states that are relatively functional. So, and you actually—
We're doing okay.
You are a place that has so many assets. The question is really whether you can leverage your full potential and then share the benefits. But you're a global leader, right? You're of a scale, and you've got the right geography and the right mix of innovation assets. And the question is, how do you, really unlock them? So I think you can do it, but it's not going to be waiting for someone. This is not 1975 or even 1995 where everyone's looking up and going, maybe we'll get this earmark, maybe we'll get that bill. It's over. Yeah. It is over. Yeah. You guys are in charge now.
All right, but you're not.
And I think, so this is going to require a much tighter, sharper, focused, disciplined, formal and informal network of leaders who really get up every morning and work together. Yeah. And that I think is the only question about Philadelphia.
Certainly, it's the struggle we had in working on the report with you. Connect to Compete, great report. It's on the Brookings website. I want to give these guys a round of applause. Thank you for being with us. Yeah. January 2018, Amazon, the new localism. And now we've got our second Fellows video.
My work specifically is going to focus on 14 to 26-year-olds across the region, right? What do they need to know, right? What do they need to be building in terms of skill sets and relationships? And also looking at what matters to them, and can we articulate that back to employers and people who are helping you get into programs where you can learn skills to get to sustainable work. There's some preliminary work and research I've done that says the skill sets people really are valuing in the workplace in the 21st century are actually some of the same skills and skill sets that protect someone's mental health in the face of adversity. Those types of situations, I'll say, can help produce the kinds of skills that employers are looking for at being adaptable, learning how to navigate conflict, learning how to create multiple pathways to the same endpoint and goal, learning how to be empathetic, learning how to manage your emotions, but how do you bring all that life has taught you to bear? How does your wisdom from expertise come to bear in the space of, your livelihood and bring you to economic well-being, right? That's, I think, probably at the core, a huge part of what I'm looking for, looking at, and trying to figure out.
It's hard to resist that. I'd like Alan Greenberger, Shannon Marquez, and Roberto Moris to come on up. Roberto. So we're going to try to connect this local and global that Bruce and Jeremy have laid out for us. We know what the challenges are. You are all working locally and globally in your different positions. On the ground where you are as practitioners, and I'll start with you, Shannon. Tell us about the work you do in Africa and Cuba, the global health kind of crises that you're helping to manage, and is there a place for that back here in Philadelphia that kind of needs a home?
Well, thank you. Absolutely. I think these models that incorporate partnership, whether it's public-private, whether it's engaging the community and having a civic mindset about doing it, is something that we're seeing all over the world. The opportunity to address global challenges in food security, access to water, improving health, that's something that we need to do in many areas. So the idea that the community can be engaged as problem solvers and primarily work with all types of individuals across sectors is something that we know can be adjusted in many other geographical contexts. And we're seeing it right here in Philadelphia as well.
Yeah. What do you see as Philadelphia's most pressing public health issue? Is it the opioid crisis?
Well, absolutely. That is certainly a challenge of our current time, and it touches so many areas. I really enjoyed the opportunity of the past 2 days to talk with colleagues from different sectors about the fact, as was noted in the video by the fellow, that it's not just about treating the overdose, but then how do you partner to ensure that the individual has the opportunity to recover, to really receive the treatment that they need, but also where are they going to be housed? We know from research that individuals who are living in a circumstance that contribute to this problem, it will only continue if they don't have a better outcome and place to stay. And even what are they going to eat? How can we ensure food security in this vulnerable population?
Yeah. No, thank you for that. We could spend the rest of the evening, obviously, delving into that. I'm going to skip over to Roberto. We're going to go sort of from Africa to Chile, and then we'll come back home to Alan. One of the themes, sort of the thread through these three folks is community engagement, and what role it plays in problem solving, what role it plays in really kind of becoming trusted partners with the community and helping to kind of lift everyone's boat. Roberto has worked extensively in Chile, up and down that 3,000-mile coastline, skinny little country, but absolutely beautiful. Goes through every sort of climactic as well as kind of risk zone. You were recently telling about work you're doing on Easter Island, working with indigenous populations as well as kind of tensions between the government and indigenous populations, risk that needs to be managed both social as well as natural, and the role that community engagement plays along with sort of sophisticated modeling. Tell us a little bit about that, and obviously what I'm trying to do is see if we can bring some of that back here to Philadelphia.
Yes, I think if we talk about Easter Island, we can talk about the last 5 years, but at the same time, about 500 years ago. I think it's in the way how this community is connected with the Chilean community, because they are Chilean, but at the same time, they don't feel completely Chilean. We need to know that before to approach our relationship with them. I think is one of the main things is there's a special society. They have been living isolated for hundreds of years, but now they need to have a special connection with the Chilean government, and at the same time, they have their own problems. But they know that the island is a global heritage, but at the same time, they are the owners of the island. I think the good thing is now they are figuring out how they need to protect the island, but at the same time to be open to the rest of the world because they are the owners, but at the same time their future is connected with how many people is going to the island. One of the good things of this research we are doing with them, I think actually we have been working with that for 8 years. That is another important thing because you can go to talk to different communities, but you need to really understand their problems. For that, you need a lot of time to really understand the structural problems. In the case of this moment, they are developing, we are working together developing a current capacity model, which will be given data to know what is the sustainable balance for the future. How many people can live in the island? What is the real impact in the island? But at the same time, when will be the moment when they need to take some decisions? Some of the decisions will be part of the community, but the other decisions, they need the national government, the local government. I think that this research is building a scientific model, but at the same time, a model of trust, to believe in the model, to say, okay, if this model is saying some information, maybe we can consider the different scenarios to agree some decisions to control waste, water, energy. I think the good thing is a small island, but at the same time, the issues we are facing are the same.
Bigger. Yeah, and trust really is the bottom line for all of these conversations, which is the perfect segue to Alan. Alan, you spent nearly 8 years in city government, working as a deputy mayor, as planning director and commerce director. You've spent a lifetime before that in private practice. You had tremendous success as an advocacy voice here in Philadelphia, helping to found the Design Advocacy Group. Talk to us about kind of trust from the different perspectives that you've experienced, and if there have been any changes in Philadelphia over the period that you've been kind of practicing, because certainly from my perspective, that seems to be critical to have these conversations with the community. Regardless of what the future holds, there has to be a trusted relationship between the citizens and its government.
Well, you know, what I found in pretty much every issue we've ever faced in government, and it's probably true in business as well, is that trust and its companion respect are the pair that lies at the bottom of everything. There are an awful lot of issues that were out there that people might have different opinions about, and there can be an honest debate about, but if they didn't feel respected, in other words, if you didn't gain their trust, it sort of didn't matter what anybody thought, because that became the primary hurt. And I think that the building of trust is a very complicated thing. You don't build it because you have a nice little plan to do it. You build it because you earn it. And I think the way it's earned is mostly by being respectful, by listening to people, by taking them seriously, but not necessarily by simply agreeing. Right? There are a lot of issues, public issues, that can't get decided by social media plebiscite. It doesn't work, and it's not the way our government is structured either. Government is a representative government. It's not a sort of a Greek, ancient Greek kind of democracy.
Right.
And that means that some people are going to have to take responsibility because they've been authorized to make decisions. And the question is, have they at least heard the kind of opinions that are out there? Have they taken them seriously? Have they shown the respect that people who give opinions want to get? And then you have to take responsibility for decisions. It's a pretty complicated affair, but I do truly believe that if you do take people seriously, you're halfway there, at least in gaining their trust, even if they don't like the decision you reached.
Yeah, no, it's a great answer. In the remaining time, I'd like to ask the three of you to answer the same question and see if we can pull some threads together. Jeremy and and Bruce argue that the new localism is about network of cities and it's about kind of repurposing or creating new institutions to solve the 21st century problems. Certainly in the United States, it's not coming from the federal government. Chile, I think, still has a very strong central government, so it may not be a direct corollary. But are there examples in your work that resonate with the argument that they're making in terms of this moment of change, this kind of this time of friction that's healthy, that you see kind of creating new opportunities within your different disciplines? So we'll start with you, Shannon.
Sure. I think this idea that the power is in the problem solvers is something that we're seeing in global health around the world. Gone are the days that you're relying on the government to help address these challenges. Social entrepreneurs are reaching across these boundaries, working in the private sector as well as the public sector to come up with innovative solutions. We see that in the use of, for example, cell phone technology to address health challenges. I think that the only way to be successful is to continue this type of partnership and to engage communities. So there are many examples in global health.
Yeah. Can you give us a few?
Sure. I think that obviously the opportunity to address challenges related to nutrition and food security, but also access to safe water, could be really solved better in this partnering across sectors. Training individuals to be responsible is something that's worked well in Africa, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, thinking about in these urban environments where the infrastructure is aged or maybe didn't have the opportunity to develop, try to partner with agencies who can provide this in real time, but also innovative solutions using like cell phone technology, as I mentioned, to monitor and evaluate systems.
And I imagine the NGO community is a critical kind of component of that equation?
Absolutely, because they're bringing the key stakeholders together and also have the sensitivity, as was mentioned, to really build trust in communities, because that's what really matters as well, ensuring that we're engaging communities in these processes.
Got it. So Roberto, in Chile, do you see the same kind of dynamism at play that Bruce and Jeremy are seeing kind of around the world in terms of this kind of change of governance and kind of focus on kind of taking charge of your own destiny?
Yeah, I think it's very easy to recognize how everywhere local communities, they are pressing, the system. I know that every country is different. Our country is a very centralized country where the most important person is the president. But at the same time, it's something we need to address, how we are decentralizing the country, but in the Chilean way. In our work, we really believe that local governments is something we need to transform. It's not just create new institutions, it's how we can manage institutional practices, because in our country we have 4 years of government without re-election. That means it's very difficult to have structural transformations. But at the moment, local mayors are very powerful, but they don't have enough resources, especially the skills in the even richer municipalities have a lot of weaknesses. And I think the role of at least our university should be very important, because we are not just training professionals, we need to train a different kind of professional. That is like Michael is worried about children. I think we need to think in the skills for the future, but at the moment we need to understand the system, because there are a lot of things we can do with the current instrument. That is, we need to understand the baseline first and later define what is the new instrument that we need for the future. And I think we are trying to do both at the moment.
Yeah. So Alan, kind of bringing it home then, from your perch in government particularly, what do you see, I guess, both as perhaps sort of the changes that are going on in Philadelphia that Bruce and Jeremy have seen kind of nationally and globally, and where do you see the stumbling blocks for us in terms of perhaps not reaching our potential?
Well, one thing I wanted to say in reference to the new localism, which is where I want to start this answer, I was trying to think back in 8 years of sitting at the mayor's cabinet room once and twice a week. I I can almost count on my hands how many times we actually talked about the federal government or we had to talk about the state government a little more because there were some more direct connections, but it was an amazing set of non-topics. And I think it's for the reasons that you write about in the book. They're gone. They're not helping us. I mean, the one big thing that I had to work on was managing a massive cut in the community development block grant money, which we did, and it forced us to kind of understand how to circle our wagons around what we thought were the most critical programs. But beyond that, we always thought that it's on us somehow. And on us didn't mean on the government by itself. It meant on what I always described as a need to align the wills of government, of the private investment or business sector, and of citizens. And when you get those aligned, and that takes a lot of work, and sometimes, as you know, with the work you did on the Central Delaware, you don't do it once, and then it's all okay. You have to do it over and over and over again until those things do get aligned, and when they get aligned, the money shows up. Not magically, you have to work it, but it does show up because will is the absolute critical thing. And I do think in Philadelphia, we are getting better at that. Look at what we're doing here. This institution is involved. That's why you're here. That's why I'm here. This institution is playing a key role at an appropriate level. We have these great connections to government. We have connections to the private world. And I think for those of you who haven't looked at the videos that are attached to the Amazon proposal, worth a look. They're really quite wonderful, but they speak very much to this business of everybody's got to be in the game. Whether we win or lose, everybody's got to be in the game. And that's just that is the reality here.
Well, that seems to be Jeremy's 2 + 2 = 4. That we're fully in. We're perhaps at full cylinder. But how do we get to that 2 + 2 = 5? I think is still the.
Well, one thing, and that gets to the biggest challenge we have, which inevitably, as it always does, it goes to some of the very core issues that all cities face. We face poverty, lack of opportunity, educational issues, the things that you don't solve just because you say you want to solve them. Right. That you have to work, hundreds of little places to start to make an impact on them. And the fact is, and I was thinking about Michael O'Brien's video before, we can't have a success. We can't do 2 + 2 = 5 if we've got 20 or 25% unemployment in certain parts of our community. Right. It's obviously not fair, but even leaving that aside, it just won't work. We must bring people up together. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to be equal or everybody's going to have the same income, but everybody has to have the same access to actualize themselves. Yeah.
So a quick little lightning round to wrap up. Shannon and Alan and Jeremy actually all led workshops over the past 2 days that helped the fellows, whom you're going to meet in a minute, kind of focus on their challenges and really kind of hone their questions for the next 6 months of their fellowship. And Roberto floated amongst them. So they were deeply embedded in helping to articulate a problem and then think of a path forward. So if you could, in a kind of a quick and concise way, what did you learn most over the past 2 days working with the fellows and kind of in the summit itself?
Whether it was in health or education, understanding how to engage individuals to see what the ROI would be, to understand what's in it for them in working on addressing this urban challenge. It was really remarkable to hear from our colleagues their perspective and their lens on that particular issue. The ER as a hub of services and connections to address community health in general, that really puts that on its head. And we all learned more from each other, but it was interesting to hear their perspective on sort of why this mattered.
That's great. So the varying viewpoints that come just from your own discipline, because we often use the same language and they mean completely different things.
Absolutely.
Alan, how about you?
Well, what I saw in the last couple of days, and I saw in the 8 years in public life, was that there is an extraordinary amount of talent and ambition and good ideas in places in all kinds of places in the city. And those three individuals who you'll hear from really exhibit that. But what I also saw is that when you bring together a whole bunch of other people with good intent, egos are aside, and real intelligence, all of their ideas got better.
Yeah, no, it's about problem solving. It's not about the ego. How about you, Roberto? Quickly, wrap up for us.
Yeah, I think the fellows are interested in very specific problem. They have a special attachment, but at the same time, when we were in this workshop, I think everybody believed that is our problem. Even I am from Chile. Yeah. I think the Centennial Park CDC project, the solar project you will see, is something about financial sustainability for this the Community Development Corporation, but it's just an excuse to think in the plan for the future of this community. I think will be something we have been learning. Everybody is learning about the problem, but at the same time, we are very interested to know about what is happening in 6 months more.
It's a great point to end on. So let's thank our local to global panel, Shannon, Alan, and Roberto. And we're going to have our music whisk you off the stage. Thank you. And we'll have our final video, Chris Spar of the Centennial Parkside District.
As an organization, the Centennial Parkside Community Development Corporation has made a lot of progress with the idea of an energy investment district here in East Parkside. We've already built some partnerships with strategic partners in the neighborhood, including Philadelphia Zoo, the Please Touch Museum, Fairmount Park. But we really see that the Urban Innovation Fellowship could take us to another level by injecting some expertise and additional resources into our efforts, particularly to engage our neighborhood around this and to build a truly community-owned renewable energy system within the neighborhood. The residents know that change is coming to this neighborhood and they want to be a part of this change. And so I want to facilitate that through my role as the Executive Director of the Centennial Parkside CDC and through the Lindy Fellowship that could support our renewable energy project.
So with that, I'm pleased to present the 2017 first class of the Lindy Institute Urban Innovation Fellows, Priya Maiman, Chris Spar, and Michael O'Brien. I have to say, these guys' enthusiasm is infectious. They came to Drexel on Monday and just kind of was bubbling over. You put a little bit of money out there and an idea, and it's amazing the energy and interest and talent that it attracts. I mean, I'm just floored. And we were flabbergasted. Literally 106 applicants from across the city, all up and down, and then these guys rose to the top. So we are thrilled and delighted and pleased as we can be to have you here. So another round of applause. But underscoring all of this, and if we think back to the past two conversations, are these challenges. And you guys are literally in the trenches. This fellowship was designed, we originally called it was actually Andrew Zitzer's idea, a local heroes fellowship. We wanted to recognize folks who were really thinking, working, trying to figure out the issues of the day. As we were putting this fellowship together, I asked the staff, I want this to be ripped from the headlines. And the opioid crisis, of course, rises to that level, as does kind of everything that you guys are working on. So understand that sort of as the context and the backdrop for our interest at Lindy and at Drexel to bring our resources to bear with you on problem solving, because that's really what it's all about. You are the urban problem solvers. So what I'm going to ask first, and take a sip, is to give me the elevator pitch for each of your projects. So short, concise, and then we'll kind of get into some of the weeds. And I'd like to also then learn about what you learned the last 2 days. So let's start with you, Michael.
Sure. So good evening, everybody. Thank you for that beautiful video, mostly, by the way. So my project really is centered around 14 to 26-year-olds and the developing skill sets and strengths and character traits that they really need to be successful in the 21st century workplace in the face of automation and in the face of a shifting labor market that is actually causing some angst even amongst employers, right? And so for me, it's really trying to take an approach that centers on 14 to 26-year-olds, but really will probably start to focus primarily first on the trainers, right? The employers that actually put their own capital into training employees or potential employees kind of in the pre-employment phase.
So the elevator's almost at the top.
Gotcha. And then the second piece, and with this I'm done, right? The second piece is the institution that does the workforce development work, which over the last 2 years has really expanded to include schools, after-school programs, a union. There are a number of places trying to prepare young people for the workplace. So we're going to focus in there and try to get some common language, values, and some common ideologies moving in that space.
Critical. Priya.
So my project is based on the role of the emergency department in urban centers and really being a true nexus of social determinants of health, mental, physical, all of the issues all come together in that one space. And this city is ripe with organizations and opportunities to improve many different factors, and they don't all converge on the emergency department. So the narrative has always been focus on primary access to primary care, focus on increased access in general. But what, in the using sort of terminology from Amazon and Uber and all of that, the populace has voted. And there's a particular part of our community that really accesses care only through the emergency department, either through absolute need or perceived need. And we are missing a lot of opportunities to engage them and connect the dots for them to make the path to overall health and well-being a little bit easier. So the idea is, how can we really harness and capitalize on that time and space and that moment with patients who determine that the emergency department is their main source of care, to then really work to raise the tide so that overall this health of the city and the population can be affected and improved.
So in many ways, instead of it being a place of last resort, it becomes the healing heart of a community.
And sort of the perfect pivot.
Yeah.
Like we have captive audience, we have them, we know all of the issues that are converging to bring them to us for whatever reason.
And they're in place, they exist. Chris, you're dealing with kind of renewable energy, and you're also dealing with deep poverty. Tell us about your the vision for your project.
Sure. Thank you all for being here tonight, and thanks to everybody who spent the last few days helping us think through all of this. I represent the Community Development Corporation in a neighborhood that has experienced many, many years of disinvestment. Yet we are a neighborhood that is surrounded by really important assets in the city. Cultural institutions, Fairmount Park, and so there's no reason that we should be in the state that we're in right now. And we see this project as an opportunity to produce something that these institutions already need and develop a business model where we can provide this, and in turn those institutions can invest into the community through purchasing this resource from us as an organization that represents the larger community. So in this case, it happens to be renewable energy, it happens to be solar energy that we plan to be owners and operators of, and selling them to the cultural institutions within the neighborhood in order to lift this community out of the state that it's in, the state of poverty that it's in.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, working for an anchor institution that very much believes in that practice of engaging with the community through procurement of goods and services as one vehicle. In some ways, you've turned that on its end. You've created the utility, and then you're going to the anchors in terms of them becoming clients, as opposed to it being sort of, so it becomes a two-way the street there. It's fantastic. So tell me, guys, what did you learn over the past 2 days? Was it useful? What were the biggest takeaways from the summit? Again, for the audience, for those of you who don't know, we spent 2 days with the fellows. We opened on Monday morning with a plenary called "Who Owns the Future?" And by the way, that's Jeremy Nowak's line, not mine. But with a great panel, many of whom are here today: Sandy Shea, Paul Levy, I saw he's in the house, and others, talking about the viaduct, the Reading Viaduct, as a kind of case study in change. And the goal there was to basically say, everybody's in it together. And it's in a democracy, it's a big tussle of ideas, of resources, of ownership. Chinatown, Gail Issa was there from the Asian Arts Initiative. John Chin was there from the Chinatown CDC. We had a representative from the Reading Viaduct Project. And everyone had their own kind of viewpoint on what was important about the viaduct and why it was so important. But until you get folks in a room like that and begin to see that the Venn diagrams, sometimes they overlap and sometimes they don't. So that set up a day and a half of intensive workshops with, led by Alan, Shannon, and Jeremy. Alan led Chris Spar's team to think about this Centennial Solar District or project. Shannon led Priya's team around this emergency room as kind of community heart. And then Jeremy worked with Michael and his team on the kind of workforce development. So give us a kind of synopsis of the time, and then what were the key takeaways. And then, if we have time, I'd like to think about what do the next 6 months look like? Because they've got 6 months to do something, and we'll be back here to share that with you. Go ahead.
Sure, it was an intense couple of days for sure, but it was great. And really, we are at a point with our project where we've done a lot of the legwork in terms of forming the relationships with the partners of the institutions in the neighborhood, and looking at some of the technical aspects of a potential solar installation or several solar installations throughout the neighborhood on underutilized land. And we recognize that this solely could be just a business relationship, a business model, and we could do it without community engagement. But that would be contrary to one of our core missions as a community development corporation. As a community development corporation, we are here to serve the community. And what I learned over the past couple of days in terms of the community engagement piece, which is what I was really getting at, because I think the community engagement piece is really the hard part. The technical part is hard, but the community engagement piece is really hard.
The hardest.
The ownership around a niche technology like this. Yeah. And so I've learned that I can work with the Lindy Institute, and this may be I might be stepping into your next question about the next 6 months, but
we're about breaking down boundaries.
To really use data to start to think about where we are now as an organization, where we are now as a community, where do we want to get, which is what we've been doing the whole time as a Community Development Corporation. We are the organization that in the neighborhood and the cultural institutions recognize this is why they come to us, that has built the respect of the residents. I mean, we're a resident-driven organization. My board of trustees is primarily residents. And we've built that trust, and we need to maintain and continue that trust. But we also need to think about where we are now, use data to do that, think about where we want to go, and how we can use this revenue model to get us there. What are specific things that we can address with the income that we're going to generate from this? Not only now, but down the road, because really what this is a sustainable form of income. We operate fine with foundation money right now. But when that foundation money goes away, what's going to keep us going? And what's going to really meet the goals of the community? And what's great about this revenue source is it's our revenue source. We've derived it. The community's derived it, and so we can decide what we're going to do with it. Foundation money is great, and we love foundation money, and we've been very lucky to get it. But it's restricted to what kind of the agreement is, what you're going to do with that money. Whereas this can really be a community-driven process around what are our priorities and what can we do with this money.
Community engagement becomes sort of the kernel, it sounds like, of where you take this project now.
Absolutely, and not only the piece about the data and where we are now, where we're going to go, but how do we approach our residents at their level? Bring this really big, grand idea to their level and capacitate the community around it, so that they really feel that this is their project.
Yeah, excellent.
And so,
So Priya, Chris is very much place-based. He's got a district, it's connected to the park, there's anchor institutions. You're thinking of a system, right, that literally knows no boundaries. I mean, it's a model, it could be a template that's a national template. What did you learn these last couple of days? And then we'll pivot and think a little bit forward also.
Well, I mean, I learned a tremendous amount. One of the things that led me to really apply for the fellowship and just to try was the idea that really solutions are going to come from great minds that are outside of medicine. And I'm in the House of Medicine, and I've sort of been working in that construct, and really where great advancement will come is sort of bringing all those different perspectives. What I was, at times not so pleasantly, but overall now in retrospect, pleasantly surprised at realizing some of my limitations of I have a reality, and that reality is based in what I see every day in the emergency department. And a lot of the time of the last 2 days was just spent explaining that. And I think for, the way Jeremy describes lessons from the book, I feel like the emergency department is a microcosm of those same lessons. The system around has failed part of our community and some of our patients, and we are kind of a place in the midst of it that's easy. But when you're not one of those people, or you don't know that world, you may not completely understand it. And so what I had to learn was how to translate some of those individual stories to convey meaning and message. And that just taking those steps back then made me see here part of where we haven't been able to make these strides is because we are speaking different languages, and we assume that the other person is seeing what we see.
Right.
And so that's a great lesson, and it's a great lesson to kind of, my whole process is to repurpose how we see the emergency department and how really it could be critical in any kind of community health.
Yeah.
And population health efforts, but the first step is really getting everybody to understand what the reality is compared to what the ideal and what the direction is.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. It's really interesting to me, again, and partly because I'm sort of listening to all of you and thinking about your applications, but the commonalities between the projects is really striking, and obviously you're each kind of looking at different sectors and from different perspectives, but this kind of a sense of agency, of taking control, of empathy, of a positive problem solving really sort of, I think, is what distinguishes all of your projects, and is in the best of ways, I think, emblematic of what this fellowship could be and should be. Michael, your project, as I understand it, is not just about workforce development, but it's really about also the impact of trauma. Can you tell us how that conversation was over the last couple of days and how it informs your work moving forward?
Yeah, I was blessed, man, to be in a room with John Rich and Sandy Bloom and thinkers and doers and clinicians and theorists and people who push a global understanding around the issue of trauma. I mean, I think Drexel is doing fantastic work in that space, and to be able to have both of them there on top of having Jeremy in the room and all these other folks that I was able to also ask to come, to have that kind of a brain trust, look at something that is relational, right? Trauma is relational. And not just trauma, but we're also talking about chronic stress. And if I could briefly just kind of give two quick definitions. Sure. So trauma is a physical or emotional experience, perceived or literal threat, being involved in that experience that elicits feelings of terror, helplessness, or a lack of control. So the flip side, or I won't say the flip side, but the big problem with trauma is that trauma inherently causes stress. Now, the flip side, there are chronic stressors in our lives that are not necessarily traumatic, but they're chronic, right? They're relentless, they're always there. It doesn't, as an example, it doesn't matter how much money you make, parenting alone is stressful. You cannot be everywhere at all times. So you can have all the money in the world, you're still going to miss key things in your child's life. And that can be very stressful. Caregiving for a loved one with a chronic illness Doesn't matter how much money you have, it still causes a lot of stress. So there are a lot of things that in our city, unfortunately, people are living in, if it was, a Venn diagram of chronic stress and trauma, we've got people, a lot of people, hundreds of thousands living in that sweet, ugly spot in the middle. And so we know what happens to the brain and to the body. We know what happens to very particular types of skills that we are readily asking people to deliver in a number of contexts. And we know what happens to their ability to deliver those skills when they're living under the body's onslaught of the stress response system. And so at some point, we have to be courageous, I think, enough to go, that's just not working for anybody anymore. Regardless of how much it costs or how much time it takes, we've got to look at this ecosystem and say, who can play what part and how do we iterate forward, knowing that it's going to take a while. And I think the time we spent together was really spent in that space. There were days where, or there was one day or a couple hours where it was like, oh, the young person is the most important. No, it's the employer that's most important. No, it's the workforce development agency that's most important. And what we realized is it's an ecosystem. Yeah. All parts are important, right? So I think Jeremy was a wonderful and tremendous help in getting me to think product driven. He's like, even if you don't come up with a specific product by the end, have it as a placeholder to anchor you down. And it really did give myself and the group a kind of homeostasis to kind of go back to and say, cool, we got 6 months, let's trim the fat. Mike, you got a 17-year project. It's okay. I know what I'm doing for the next 17 years. Yeah. Right? And just to close out this piece, it also showed me, Jeremy said something toward the end that really called me to my own center, if you will. He said, you've got to distill what's up here for other people. That's what I've heard over the last 2 days. You've got a lot of experience. People are clearly coming to you for stuff, right? You got to distill that. And that also let me know that for me, this is also a bit of an accelerator, right? It's an incubator, but also an accelerator. My boss was there, Aviva Kappas, executive director of the Village of Arts and Humanities, and she said something too, Mike's already doing this work. He's already working with workforce development agencies and some employers. And so those two comments really helped give me a new framework for this, because I was going real theoretical.
All right, so lightning round, all three of you. What do the next 6 months look like? And Michael, I'm going to start with you, but I'm going to cut you off if you ramble.
Sorry, guys, I like to talk. Theater was my first love and my first entrance into the world. The next 6 months, thank you, I appreciate it. The next 6 months for me are really looking at what tools are going to give me the right foundation to set me up for 17 years worth of work, and how can I really leverage the Lindy brand and the Drexel brand and the relationships and the research that's being done across the school to really add some legitimacy to an issue that people particularly just filter right out because it doesn't seem important enough to them, or it's not presented, unfortunately, in the media or in any other space where we are truly accessing our information in the 21st century. It's not presented in a way that attracts people to go, oh yeah, that's my problem too. So I'm really interested in how to, again, reframe, build common language, some common values, and some common ideologies and understanding so that we can iterate forward together.
Sounds like a perfect work plan. Priya.
I have, I don't know if it's 17 years, but I have, because I'll be too old anyway, but quite a list and sort of a game plan. I think the biggest sort of layer of that is having a perfect pitch for whether it be, the CEO, president of a health institution, or the mayor, both, based on science, based on the integration of the social determinants of health, and of course based on economics and return on investment. But with the greatest impact of improving the population. And so it's sort of delineated into, that's the big picture. There's research approaches with several questions underneath that big umbrella, as well as programmatic approaches that is particularly focused on the role of the emergency department in the opioid epidemic.
Perhaps looking at a pilot project that may prove the concept.
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, many pilots.
So my project, in some ways, has two parallel paths in a sense, but they depend on each other. So we have the technical and financial side of the project, and we have the community engagement side of the project, and they both depend on each other, and they're very important. So one of the first things I need to do is I need to bring together my team my board of trustees, who and I want to be clear that this, I'm the Lindy Fellow, but this idea came from my board of trustees, and they were crazy enough to bring me on and say, you need to help us carry this forward. Yeah. And so this board of trustees is, some of them are in the audience here, and I have to give them a lot of credit for this idea. Yeah. So bring them back into this conversation and really start to think about, okay, what type of data do we need, and what can Lindy help us with in terms of laying out that plan, where we are now, where do we want to go, and how is this revenue piece going to drive us? Because to be honest, we are a fairly new community development corporation, and with limited capacity, we don't have all the access to all the data we need. Right. We do a lot of walking the street and counting the amount of vacant properties and noting it down, that type of thing.
Old school.
Yeah, exactly, which is really important.
Sure.
But we're so happy to have these experts, and I'm so happy to have Alan, who pointed this out to me, over the past couple of days, that we have this ability to work with Lindy to think about these things from a data standpoint, and then take that and take our message around this and all this picture that we've painted, and take it to the community at the level that they are, and work with them to dream about what we're going to do with this money. So I think in 6 months, I think we can really get there and paint this picture and carry it forward with the community engaged in this process. So,
Well, perfect, I think, ending. Let's hear it for the 2017 inaugural Lindy Institute Urban Innovation Fellow. And that's it, guys. We are wrapping up. Thanks to our partners and sponsors. If you want to follow us on Facebook and Twitter, you can do that if you're so inclined. We will have additional programming, particularly around the 6-month anniversary of their fellowships. But now there's food and drink outside. Let's go and have a good time. Thank you for being here. Enjoy.